Legendary Pictures obtained the U.S. rights to Godzilla in 2010, a full 12 years since Roland Emmerich last brought his version of the King of the Monsters to American shores. They sought out indie horror auteur Gareth Edwards, whose micro-budget debut feature Monsters had wowed audiences the world over through its economical storytelling and focus on the size and scale of the titular monsters threatening the protagonists. The fact that he was able to make the film on a budget of only $500,000 showed them that not only was Edwards adept at telling moving stories of giant creatures, he could also do so on a budget. And so came his 2014 film, Godzilla.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little town, June.
Hey, how's everyone doing? Welcome back to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham, and I am here with Chris. As again, we are doing a Godzilla film. Today, we are doing Legendary's Monsterverse reboot and intro of Godzilla in Gareth Edwards' 2014 film with the same title, Godzilla. I was what? 2014. I was about 20, 21 when this film came out. And
May of 2014.
So I was 20 at the time. And I was so excited again to go see this in theaters. And sadly, a buddy of mine, he's like, oh man, the night we were supposed to go opening night, he ended up having to work. And I was like, well, I'll wait. I won't go without you. And sure as shit, we did not end up going. And I hated myself for it. I was so disappointed.
Man, that's rough. Yeah, I was 21 going on 22 when it came out. I had just spent an extended period of time out of state, staying with an aunt and uncle. And when I came back almost just a few weeks before this came out, I had a buddy who to this day is one of my best friends that we're the two huge resident Godzilla nerds, and he bought me a Godzilla t-shirt as like a coming back present, and we went to the IMAX showing with who is now his wife but was his girlfriend at the time. Like, I remember I went over to his place to chill out before we went. We skipped over and just watching like favorite scenes from like Godzilla versus Destroyer and stuff, just to kind of get us into the Godzilla headspace. And then we drove out, went to an IMAX screening, and it was pretty incredible. And I'll never forget it. I've ended up seeing a couple of movies at that. It's one of the biggest IMAXs here in Florida, I think, or at least one of them that's within any reasonable driving distance to us. And so we try to see all of the biggest movies there. I know I saw Oppenheimer there. It was an incredible experience, and I'm looking forward to seeing another Godzilla movie there.
Yeah, I'm in Beloit, Wisconsin, and our closest IMAX is like Loves Park, Illinois, or Rockford, Illinois. So it's only like a 25 minute drive, so it's not too far. But yeah, I did not sadly get to see this in theaters, and I wish I could have. And I wanted to go to the 2023 G Fest. On the Saturday night at G Fest, they were playing this film, but it was a 10 o'clock at night showing. And my lady and I didn't end up going. I was like, oh, damn it,
Gotcha.
I should just go with my gut instinct and I should go.
Yeah, I can say that I've been lucky enough to see every Monsterverse movie in theaters. I think I saw G14 and Skull Island each twice in theaters. And then I saw King of the Monsters, I think, 4 times. And yeah, I saw Godzilla vs. Kong 10 times because I could see it for free.
Holy Jesus!
Yeah, I wanted to set my own record. I just wanted to have a movie that I saw a record number of times because I think when Star Wars Episode 7 came out, I was a big Star Wars fan, so I saw it like 7 times, which was a record for me. And I was working at a theater for all this, so I mean, you could see them for free. So before and after a shift, it was very convenient to go watch a movie. It wasn't like I was, traveling long distances and paying crazy amounts for every ticket and whatnot. But when Godzilla versus Kong came out, by then I was like, Star Wars sucks now. I was like, I want a cool movie to be my record. So I saw Godzilla versus Kong 10 times. And I think that will stand as my record probably.
Yeah, I seen King of the Monsters once, Kong Skull Island once, and then Godzilla vs Kong once because it being on like when it was on like HBO Max and all that. I just came home, cranked up the surround sound, and let it rumble.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had HBO Max, so like I would put it on, but like I was very hardcore because I worked at a theater, so I was like, oh, this day and date streaming stuff. I'm like, this is bullshit, I'm like they're gonna try and kill our freaking industry by doing this streaming stuff. So I was like very anti the day and date streaming stuff. So I was like, I'm seeing the movie in the theater to prove a point. So I saw it, so I went 10 times in theaters to see it because at that point the future of movie theaters, which I'm not in theaters anymore, but at that point the future was very uncertain. And so I was drawing some hard lines to support the industry I was in.
Hey, and I don't blame you there because it kind of takes me a lot to get to go to a theater. It has to be something that I'm like 150% in to see, and if it's a Godzilla film, I'm all in. So,
Yeah.
but I'll get into some background and information on Godzilla 2014, and then I'll go into some what opening thoughts of what we thought of the film.
Yeah, sure.
Godzilla is a 2014 American giant monster film directed by Gareth Edwards, written by Max Borenstein, from a story by David Callahan, with visual effects by Jim Regal, produced by Legendary Pictures with funding from itself, Warner Bros., and Rat Pack Dune Entertainment. This is the second of the film of the Godzilla franchise to be fully Hollywood produced and the 30th Godzilla film overall, as well as the first entry into the Monsterverse. This film stars Aaron Taylor Johnson, Ken Watanabe, Elizabeth Olsen, Juliette Binoche, Sally Hawkins, David Strathern, and Bryan Cranston. This film was released to American theaters by Warner Bros. On May 16, 2014, and to Japanese theaters by Toho on July 25th, 2014. The second Hollywood-produced Godzilla film, this Godzilla film attempts to be a more faithful adaptation of the franchise, more than previous attempt by TriStar in 1998. Gareth Edwards decided on a restrained approach similar to when films were fueled by like a sense of anticipation and relied on like a high suspenseful film, citing that Alien, Jaws, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind as influences for this film. And this film was a success at the box office and led to the development of the Monsterverse franchise and 3 sequels so far featuring Godzilla. And Toho released its own series reboot to this series in 2016, known as Shin Godzilla, or over here in the States, it was Godzilla Resurgence. So, some opening thoughts on the film. I wish I would have seen this in theaters because the more and more I watch this film, I think the more and more it grows on me. And I know Godzilla's not in this a lot, but when he is in this film, it's grand and great. And I absolutely love the scenes with Bryan Cranston, Aaron Taylor Johnson as Ford. I could live without, Elizabeth Olsen. She's not in it too much as his wife, but there are plenty of good characters. Kent Watanabe as Dr. Sarazawa. But this is a great reintroduction to Godzilla for younger kids in 2014, or like you and I, people who have been fans for 15, 20 years.
Yeah, agreed. It is that sort of Batman Begins for Godzilla, that kind of slow burn, ease back into the franchise or reintroduce the character in this sort of modern era. Godzilla doesn't, we'll get into things and stuff here. I love the movie. There's certainly things to criticize, and we'll get into things to criticize because I feel like some people are just sort of put this movie beyond criticism. There's certainly things to critique about it, but it does do a lot right, and it did usher in a new era of Godzilla as like a modern icon of blockbuster cinema, and so that can't be underappreciated. The cast is great. I would have loved to see Bryan Cranston be more of the lead, or just make it farther into the movie or be a bit more prominent. I think Aaron Taylor Johnson, unfortunately, he's kind of got this thing where I see it a little bit with Keira Knightley as well, which is when some British or English actors have to do an American accent, they sometimes sort of lose their charisma a little bit. I noticed it a little bit too with Emilia Clarke, who's from Game of Thrones. When she's doing her natural accent, she's kind of like infinitely charismatic and very like great on screen. But when they push her and sort of have her doing an American accent and not her natural accent, like in like Terminator Genesis or something like that, she just feels like wooden and hollow by comparison. So I think Aaron Taylor Johnson is another one of those that when he drops his natural accent and does an American accent, he just kind of comes off a little plain. And I don't think that does him too many favors. Originally, they were trying to get Joseph Gordon-Levitt into that role, and I think he would have been great as Brody, but that didn't come to pass. Everyone loves Elizabeth Olsen. Obviously, she's great, and she's not a very large part of this movie, but the part she has, she's a ray of sunshine as far as that goes. She's a great character, and Ken Watanabe, that's just like match made in heaven casting to put Ken Watanabe as Serizawa in a Godzilla movie. That's just, couldn't have done it better. And so like the human characters, they got stuff going on. They got interesting dynamics. They're solid. It's a bit of a slow burn movie. We can talk later about too much of a slow burn or not. It's a little bit holding back on Godzilla. We can talk about, there's preferences on, does it hold back a little too much or a little not enough, but generally speaking, like, this is a pretty epic and fantastic movie.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything you say. And let's get right into it. I'll drop the trailer in here. We'll get a plot synopsis going, and then we can come back with all the goodies on Godzilla 2014.
I want to talk to somebody in charge. You are not fooling anybody when you say that what happened was a natural disaster. You're lying. It was not an earthquake. It wasn't a typhoon. Because what's really happening is that you're hiding something out there. And it is going to send us back to the Stone Age. God help us all.
In 1954, we awakened something.
Well, there's nuclear tests in the Pacific. Not tests.
They were trying to kill it.
You have no idea what's coming.
Can you kill it?
The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control. And not the other way around.
In 1954, Godzilla, a prehistoric alpha predator, is lured to Bikini Atoll in an attempt to kill him with a nuclear bomb. In 1999, monarch scientists Ishiro Serizawa and Vivian Graham investigate the skeleton of a monster similar to Godzilla in a cavern unearthed by a collapsed uranium mine in the Philippines. They also find 2 giant spores, one dormant and one hatched, along with a trail leading to the sea. In Japan, the Jinjira nuclear power plant experiences unusual seismic activity. Supervisor Joe Brody sends his wife Sandra to lead a team of technicians into the reactor. A tremor breaches the reactor, forcing Joe to close the reactor door before Sandra and her team can escape while the plant collapses. 15 years later, Joe and Sandra's son Ford, a U.S. Navy EOD officer, returns from a tour of duty to his wife Elle and son Sam in San Francisco. However, he must immediately depart for Japan after Joe is detained for trespassing in Janjira's quarantine zone. Joe is determined to find out the cause of the meltdown and persuades Ford to accompany him to retrieve vital data from their old home. They learn that the zone is uncontaminated and retrieve the data, but are discovered and taken to a facility in the plant's ruins. The facility harbors a massive chrysalis that had been feeding off the plant's reactors for 15 years and emitting intense electromagnetic pulses over time. A giant winged insect-like creature emerges from the chrysalis and escapes, destroying the facility. Joe is severely injured and later dies. The incident is reported publicly as an earthquake. Serizawa and Graham join a U.S. Navy task force led by Admiral William Stenz to search for the creature, dubbed a Muto, or a massive unidentified terrestrial organism. Serizawa and Graham reveal to Ford that a 1954 deep-sea expedition awakened Godzilla. Nuclear tests in the 1950s were attempts to kill him. When this did not work, Project Monarch was established to study Godzilla and similar monsters secretly. They also explain that the Muto caused the Janjira meltdown. Ford reveals Joe had monitored echolocation signals indicating the Muto was communicating with something, presumably Godzilla. The Muto attacks a Russian submarine and drops it in Ojai to eat its nuclear material. Godzilla arrives causing a tsunami in Honolulu and briefly engages the Muto in battle until it flees. Serizawa deduces Godzilla was only listening as the Muto was communicating with something else, prompting the military to investigate the other spore stored in the Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Repository in Nevada. However, a second, bigger wingless Muto has already emerged and attacks Las Vegas. The scientists deduce that it is a female, and that was what the male was communicating with, their signals being a mating call. Over the scientists' objections, Sten approves a plan of using nuclear warheads to lure all 3 monsters out in the open ocean and destroy them. Returning to the U.S., Ford joins the team delivering the warheads by train, but the female Muto intercepts them and devours most of the warheads. The remaining warhead is airlifted with Ford to San Francisco, where the monsters are converging and activating after Godzilla appears at the Golden Gate Bridge, only for the male Muto to snatch it and take it to the female, who forms a nest around it in the Chinatown area. When Godzilla and the Mutos battle, Ford and a strike team enter the city via halo jump to find and disarm the warhead before it detonates. Unable to access the timer, the team gets the warhead onto a boat for disposal at sea while Ford destroys the nest. Godzilla defeats the Mutos and collapses on the shore from exhaustion. Ford gets the boat out to the open sea, is rescued before the warhead explodes, and reunites with his family at an emergency shelter the following morning. Godzilla reawakens and returns to the sea, while the media dubs him the king of the monsters and speculates whether he might be the savior of their city.
All right, so for some numbers on Godzilla 2014, this film received the biggest opening day box office result of 2014 when it came out, scoring $38,525,000 on Friday, May 16th. That was the expected to gather $100 million by May 19th and ended up surpassing it slightly with $103 million. When Godzilla opened in China, it received $10.9 million for the biggest opening day of 2014 as well. Godzilla grossed $9.3 million in North America at early Thursday screenings, one of the best late-night screenings for a non-sequel, and $93.2 million for the entire weekend, making it the 5th highest opening weekend in 2014.
Yeah, I remember. I can vouch for how electric it was. I think it was a Thursday night screening that we had gone to, and yeah, it was a great energy in the room. It was a packed house, and you know, so, like I said, I'll never forget some of those big moments. We'll talk about those later in scenes, but the audience reaction just made the whole movie so good. And yeah, another little bit about the box office is that for a time, with 524 million worldwide, it was the highest grossing giant monster movie at the global box office. That was surpassed a few years later by Kong Skull Island, that just eked by it with 568 million. So those two, the Monsterverse represents two of the the highest grossing giant monster movies of all time that are purely giant monster movies and not, a Transformers movie or something like that. And here's hoping that maybe Godzilla Kong: The New Empire might be able to break that record.
Man, I'm hoping because you spoiled one of my little numbers here with the 524 million. Yeah, it made 200, just over 200 million in the U.S. and just over 320 million uh, abroad or anywhere else, Japan, China, all that. So I mean, those are great numbers for a Godzilla film, and clearly why the MonsterVerse continued.
Yeah, and still currently the biggest Godzilla film released globally. Not specifically to Japan, but as far as a worldwide release, it is still the champion. I have a feeling that if it weren't for a certain number of lockdowns and viruses, that Godzilla versus Kong, with the proper theatrical only release and a properly opened market, that Godzilla versus Kong would have topped them all, but it was hindered significantly.
Yeah, that there's no telling how big that film could have been in theaters alone without streaming.
Hmm.
Got back to on Godzilla 2014. This film has a 6.4 out of 10 rating on IMDb, 76% on Rotten Tomatoes, based on 330 reviews with an average rating of 6.7 out of 10. A 62 out of 100 rating on Metacritic. 79% of Google users liked this film. And Godzilla is on screen for 9 minutes and 56 seconds, or 8% of the film, which is the second lowest of the entire franchise, with only Invasion of Astro Monster having less.
Yeah, and people always say like, "Oh, the Godzilla screen time was about average for one of these movies. It's perfectly right there in the sweet spot." It's like, well, I mean, kind of, sort of, yes and no, but this movie's also 2 hours compared to most of the Godzilla movies that are about 80 to 90 minutes. And I think percentage-wise, as I don't know if was the raw screen time the second lowest, or was the percentage of the total the second lowest.
I'm thinking the percentage, because the 9 minutes
Yeah,
and 56 seconds is a little bit kind of actually on like the more normal side, but the
yeah.
8%.
The second lowest percentage is like, that's kind of what matters. It's like, if it was 20 minutes but the movie was 4.5 hours long, it's like that's a lot of movie that's not the screen time. So it's like, that's all important. It's like, yeah, it's like Godzilla is, they hold back. And if I had to stake my opinion, I would say they hold back a little bit too much on Godzilla himself. We get plenty of the Mutos and things like that, but it's a little, we'll get more into this, but they hold back a little bit too much, in my opinion. Just a little.
Yeah, it's it says he took inspiration from Jaws, and you can see it, because the first time you see that shark in that film, it's like, holy hell, we're in for a treat, and the first time you see Godzilla in this film, you're thinking the same thing, like, holy hell.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's interesting because with a shark, with Jaws and a shark movie, you can have, they do POV shots of the shark. The shark is still attacking and eating people. Anytime people are in the water, you're assuming the shark's around there. You can see the fin, and like the shark is still in the scene. It's not like, there's a lot of ways that the shark is still present and constant in that movie without showing the shark on screen. With this movie, it's not necessarily so much that Godzilla is not sort of present, but he doesn't really make a debut in the movie until 50ish minutes in, and then he's just swimming from Hawaii to San Francisco for a lot of the second half of the movie. So it does feel like, people have being harsh on the film, people have said like, oh, it's a Muto movie with Godzilla just in it. That's not the worst description in the world, because Godzilla's kind of just a little bit of a plot device in the movie until the third act. So it's not so much just the raw screen time, but some of the feel and the presence of Godzilla feels a little disconnected and removed from the sort of main events of the storyline, being how the Mutos are kind of, causing all this havoc. So it's just a lot of things with the structure of the movie that kind of feels like Godzilla's a little bit off to the side, and that hurts just as much as any raw amount of screen time.
Yeah, I agree with you. He does seem like a side character, but I'm glad they fixed that in future sequels.
Yeah, it doesn't ruin the film by any means, and because we've gotten sequels, it's like we can get through this one as like the intro piece. But it was a little bit, I remember being in the screening and feeling like that sort of like agitation of like, please just show us a little bit more Godzilla. Like, please just show us a little bit more. Like, we're an hour and a half into the movie. Like, can we get a little bit more, please?
And that's my last number for you, is his first appearance. And that's just after 59 minutes, or about 48% into the film, with a few teasers of him during the opening credits. And it's not enough Godzilla.
Yeah, or and my thing with this movie is not that I'm not someone here that'd be like, oh my gosh, it needs a dramatic overhaul. I always say that this movie's maybe 10 minutes too long, and maybe most of that 10 minutes should come out of the front half of the movie. I think the movie really takes its time in a lot of good ways in the front half, but also, this always feels like it's kind of like a 100-minute movie pretending to be a 120-minute movie. It feels like the middle ground in there, like maybe, 10 or so minutes out, the famous quote that they used when they were re-editing Godzilla 2000, they said, you can shake a movie and 10 minutes will fall out. I feel like this movie could have been shaken and about 10 minutes could have fallen out without like taking a hacksaw to it and removing entire scenes. There's a lot of long panning shots in this movie. There's a lot of sort of long close-ups, a lot of dramatic pauses, a lot of like silence and slow creeping camera movements that it's like, if you just edited this a little more tightly, I just feel like you just could, drop a few seconds here, drop a few seconds here, drop a few seconds here, and that adds up over the course of a 2-hour movie. And I think there's about 10 minutes to be lost out of here. And so then the balance of Godzilla screen time to the rest of the movie would just be that much better.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And they didn't take notice of that, because the next film with Godzilla in it gets longer. So once we get to Godzilla vs. Kong, though, we get right down to the action and the good stuff.
Yeah, the next one's a little longer, but I also think they appropriately, you've not just have Godzilla in the movie. I think he's also spread out a bit more evenly across the movie. And I think when you also have more marquee monsters like Mothra, Ghidorah, and Rodan also in the mix, not just Godzilla, I think that also alleviates it a little bit. Like if the Mutos in this movie were some other famous reboot of a Toho monster that was like iconic and anticipated in its own right, I think that also would alleviate a little bit of we didn't get as much Godzilla, because these Mutos were just original monsters, and for some people it feels like, oh, they're devoting so much time to these new things when some of the audience wanted a bit more Godzilla. I think maybe if they could just trade one Muto sequence and make it a Godzilla sequence, like maybe the train sequence, not that Godzilla needs to be in that train sequence, but maybe trade a Muto sequence and give us a Godzilla sequence instead to kind of just balance it out a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I like the attack or the scene on the bridge and like stuff like that. But I could deal with another, 4 or 5 minutes of Godzilla. I would not argue with that at all.
Yeah, and I would just advocate, maybe give us a little bit more of an on-screen tussle in Hawaii with the Muto and Godzilla, or maybe have the the military come in and try to attack both of them, and that's what disrupts the fight and causes them to sort of leave. Just to kind of, we get that glorious epic reveal of Godzilla, and then we just immediately, it feels like now it's back into waiting another 20 minutes for Godzilla to be introduced again. Gareth Edwards is amazing at the introduction shots, but it feels like he spends 3/4 of the movie introducing Godzilla, and we never get that, like, okay, Godzilla's finally here, let's enjoy it a little bit. It's like if the Hawaii sequence alone had been paid off with just a halfway decent on-screen monster fight and maybe the military coming in and driving them away, if we could have got that catharsis halfway through the movie, we would have been satisfied to wait till the final act to get the much bigger showdown.
Yep, I absolutely agree with you. I'm going to give you some fun facts quick before we get into our favorite character and actually start getting into the film and having some fun on it.
Yeah, we'll do.
Godzilla was filmed under the fake working title Nautilus. According to director Gareth Edwards, it was originally codenamed Fat Man after the bomb in Hiroshima, but everyone kept thinking that it was a comedy film.
That's great.
Prior to announcing a shared cinematic series, Legendary intended to produce a Godzilla trilogy with Edwards attached to direct all three. But in May 2016, Edwards left the sequel to work on smaller scale projects.
Yeah, and a trilogy would have been something interesting. Could have been cool to see Godzilla and the sort of monster roster and foes he was dealing with evolve over like a 3-film self-contained arc. I'm a big fan of the Gamera trilogy of the 90s, and I grew up at a time when trilogies were a big thing. The Matrix trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Spider-Man trilogy, Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy. Trilogies were very big in the sort of decade where I was a youth. And so, I've always had an affinity for that. So a Godzilla trilogy, an iconic standalone Godzilla trilogy would have been cool. But the Monsterverse that we've gotten instead has also been very, very rewarding.
Yeah, what we've got so far, I wouldn't trade for something that I don't know what it is. But I'm excited to see where the Monsterverse goes.
Indeed.
This is the first Godzilla film released in 3D, with the exception of the short film Monster Planet of Godzilla, created for a ride at Sanrio Perio Land. This was not originally filmed in 3D, but was post-converted. So I have not seen it in 3D. I would love to.
Yeah, nor have I. I can't speak to the 3D quality. The IMAX showing that we went to was a 2D show, at least as far as my memory serves me. If the IMAX showing was a 3D showing, I do not remember it being 3D. I'm pretty sure we saw it in a 2D IMAX showing.
Would love to see it in 3D though. Bring it on.
Yeah.
Dr. Ishiro Serizawa's costume from his first scene in this film is a reference to special effects director Eiji Tsuburaya's typical work outfit from previous Godzilla films.
That's nice.
And always got the little callbacks. You gotta love them.
Yeah, you can't beat it.
The Brody family name from this film comes from Chief Martin Brody, the main character of Jaws, and Ford's first name references Harrison Ford, the actor who director Gareth Edwards and screenwriter Max Borenstein most wanted him to evoke.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Yeah, I don't know if Aaron Taylor Johnson evokes Harrison Ford, but, God bless him for trying, I guess.
Hey, anything's worth a shot in these films. You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, indeed. I never knew what the Ford reference was for. I knew the Brodies were from Jaws. I never knew that Ford was meant to reference Harrison Ford.
Yeah, I agree with you. As soon as you hear Brody, there's only one film I think of.
Indeed.
At 355 feet tall, the Godzilla in this film was the largest yet in the film series, though the Godzillas in all subsequent films have been taller still.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that it was this weird little tit for tat where Shin Godzilla came out and it was a little bigger than this Godzilla, and then Godzilla King of the Monsters was coming, and it was a little bit bigger than Shin Godzilla. You know, the anime trilogy, of course, dwarfs them all by a massive scale, but it's sort of animated, so you don't appreciate it the same way. But yeah, I remember the fight, and it's funny because in the original Godzilla movie, in the American version, Raymond Burr erroneously, I think, describes Godzilla as being 400 feet tall when the Godzilla was around 160 feet tall, and people joked that like eventually we would be getting a Godzilla that was actually 400 feet tall, and I always thought that was fun.
Yeah, and I mean, in King of the Monsters, he's
It's like 390 or something like that, you know?
yeah, it's like 119 meters. So it's
Yeah.
like 390, 392.
Yes, which is fun. It's like we might as well. It's like if I were to ever have my druthers and make a Godzilla movie, I would just go with like an even 400 feet. Like just commit to it. Even 400 feet, we'd do it.
Yeah, I mean the what's fun about this film is one of the fun facts I found is in one of the original drafts of the 2014 film, it was mentioned Godzilla was planned to be 600 feet tall.
Whew, that's a doozy. That would have been very interesting. I mean, I would never say no to it, but man, that is a massive scale. That it just his size relative to buildings and things like that. I mean, you're talking nearly twice as big as he is in this movie. 350 to 600, like, whew, that'd be incredible.
Yeah, so how much do you upscale the Mutos, and then down the road, how much do you upscale Kong and Ghidorah and everything
Yeah,
else?
yeah, it's a tumbling effect. You'd have 1,000-foot King Ghidorah.
Yeah, I like what we got here with the 355 feet because I believe, and I'm sure I'll talk about this next episode in King of the Monsters, but I believe Ghidorah is like 520 feet tall, which is still
Yeah,
massive compared to
yeah,
Godzilla.
yeah. Still insane. Yeah, that's interesting.
Edwards was initially confirmed to be directing the sequel, but it was unknown if any of the previous cast would be returning. In a previous interview with Gareth Edwards, he said that if the film were to have a sequel, that he would like to do a Destroy All Monsters like film.
That would have been interesting. I don't think he means necessarily in terms of an alien invasion, monster island type of concept, but just more of an ensemble monster sort of concept. And I could have seen, if you do a Godzilla trilogy, I could see it expanding outward from Godzilla in this film to getting a few of the other iconic monsters in film number 2, and then by the time you get to number 3, you have that sort of 10 to a dozen monster roster.
Yeah, and we still could definitely get that in the Monsterverse one day where all the monsters just, maybe they stop
Yeah,
listening to the alpha call and go crazy and Godzilla's got to take them out one by one.
indeed, it does seem like they're expanding interesting things. Certainly, the Hollow Earth is fertile ground to have big, huge, epic monster battles on big, huge landscapes that don't even go anywhere near a city or the surface. So just the scale could be pretty incredible down there. So I'm excited to see where that goes.
Absolutely. My last fun fact for you is a novelization written by science fiction writer Greg Cox was published by Titan Books in May of 2014 to coincide with this film's release. And Cox had previously written novelizations for movies, including Legendary's own The Dark Knight Rises and Man of Steel. And I'll tell you, I have read that novelization along with
Oh.
the rest of the Monsterverse, and they are fantastic.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because I could say like I get pretty into the into some of this extra stuff. I've read a number of the comics and graphic novel tie-ins to the MonsterVerse, and I own the art books for the MonsterVerse movies that go into a lot of the design detail and pre-production stuff. But I've never gotten into the novelizations of the movies, so that's very interesting.
Yeah, I believe all of them are on Amazon, and I mean they might be like $8 or $10 a piece, and
Nice.
they're
We might have to.
probably
Yeah. One of these days we might have to do like a special little episode where we can kind of talk about some of the interesting enhancements, changes, alterations that some of the novels bring to the table.
yeah, because the fight scenes and stuff like that are super detailed about like the Muto's like biting Godzilla or cutting him or slashing him or any
Mhm.
stuff like that. I believe they're about 320 pages a piece. So they're pretty relatively quick reads, but they're
Mhm.
actually, I've never been a big reader, but I really like the Monsterverse novelizations.
That's interesting. I know I always have to be careful with what I start buying and collecting that's Godzilla related because I can't really go small measures. There's a reason I don't really buy any of the figures or anything because I know I would buy all of them. It's like if I start to go after the novelizations of the movies, it's like that's probably just going to be a whole other shelf that I need to commit because I would want to get every single one of them.
Oh, I started I just bought the book that came out. There was the republication of or the republishing of the Godzilla and Godzilla Raids Again original novelization.
Oh, you bought that? See, I did mean to buy that one and I haven't got around to buying it yet. So you bought that one. I'll probably end up picking it up as well.
Yes, I have not read it, but I will get there soon.
Yeah, gosh. Oh my gosh, we'll have a whole other series of podcasts just about Godzilla books and comics.
Hey, I'm down for whatever. You already know it.
all Godzilla all the time. This isn't Chills and Thrills anymore. This is just Godzilla and Godzilla.
Let's do it. No.
Yeah.
That is all I have for you on fun facts, finishing up with the novelization. Again, like I said, if you get a chance, I mean, they're relatively cheap buys. I would, as a Godzilla fan, highly recommend you to, read them, 10 pages at a time on your break at work or something. It's definitely worth the read.
Yeah. I'd like to throw in just a few little fun facts and trivia that to supplement yours, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so one of them is that Guillermo del Toro was at one point considered to direct this film, but if not for Pacific Rim, which was keeping him busy at the time, he might have. We might have lived in a world where Guillermo del Toro made this film instead of Pacific Rim, which would have been very interesting. Would have been very interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't have minded to see that. I love the colorization and whatnot he did for the monsters in Pacific Rim, and I hope to do that series, the two films for that on here one day
Yeah,
when we get a chance.
yeah, that would be a lot of fun. And another little bit is that there's in early in the film when the Jira plant goes down in the classroom that Ford Brody is in, there's a life cycle of moth poster on the wall, and the adult moth sort of resembles Mothra quite a bit, and then there's a pteranodon model in the classroom that looks quite a bit like Rodan. And so like it's like these little Easter eggs that weren't necessarily meant to set up Mothra and Rodan, but it's kind of like these little Easter eggs that hint at them being part of the future of the Monsterverse. And I like when movies do really subtle things like that,
Absolutely, I love that as well because as a fan, you catch on to it. If you're not really paying attention, don't notice that stuff. It's not as fun, clearly. But if you're a fan and you notice that, you know that it's for you. It's kind of like giving you a little shout out.
Yeah, and I think visual cues like that are a lot more fun than if they had tried to name drop and set up Mothra or Rodan like within the continuity of the movie or like in existence. Like I think stuff like that, just these sort of visual cues that remind you of them and make you think of them. It's like someone pointed out that the Dark Knight trilogy does this interesting thing where at one point in Batman Begins, Bruce Wayne refers to people as two-faced phonies, and then Two-Face is a villain in the next movie, and then at one point in the Dark Knight, when talking about his armor, Morgan Freeman's character says that it'll hold up fine against cats, and then in the next movie, Catwoman's a villain. Like these things that are not like references to the characters, but like these subtle little hints and links. Like I like stuff like that because it's much more subtle than just being like, name dropping it and referencing it directly.
Yeah, like when they go back to the radiation zone and there's the fish tank or whatever with
Yeah,
Mothra. you know, in
Yeah,
it.
it's like two words that are next to each other, and part of it's smudged out, and they make up like Mothra. Like that's another one. Like I love references and nods like that. The more subtle stuff.
Stuff you got to actually, as a fan or not, you got to, if you catch it, you're paying attention.
Yeah, more like subtle foreshadowing as opposed to like hinting and connecting. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that as well.
But yeah, those are
We
just a
can
couple of fun facts I wanted to throw out.
absolutely. I love it. As I tell you every episode that you do that, keep them coming, because the more that you can give me that I don't speak of or that I don't know, the more our listeners know from us, and the more we have to talk about.
Indeed, indeed.
Why don't I go ahead and ask you who your favorite character was in this film?
It would be a tough call between. I'd be a little bit divided between Joe Brody, Bryan Cranston's character, and Serizawa, Ken Watanabe's character. I end up leaning towards Serizawa because he's the more meaningful role across the film. You know, Joe Brody doesn't really get a chance to be in on the conversations of the sort of the cat being let out of the bag in terms of the monsters. You know, he's suspicious of there being something going on, but Joe Brody doesn't really get in on the like, hey, there's a monster there, let's talk about it. Hey, what's this Godzilla thing? Let's talk about it. Like Joe Brody's not in on that part of the movie, so his contributions is a little bit more just towards the more conspiratorial side, but I love his character. But so I lean towards Serizawa being a really interesting reinterpretation of the Dr. Serizawa from the original film.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. He was my favorite character as well. And it's not just because he was, Dr. Serizawa, but I mean, I liked all of his mannerisms and his voice. And like, you could tell like the passion he spoke with about Godzilla and like trying to figure out what the Mutos were doing, like what when they're in the when they're in the scene with Ford Brody and they're kind of giving him the rundown on Godzilla, and they're finding out the echolocation that it wasn't calling to Godzilla, it was calling something else. And he's like, "Oh, check again." He's like, "We, got to figure this stuff out." And like, he just shows a lot of passion towards his job. It's not just because he has the last name Serizawa.
Yeah, of course, and in terms of characterization, he's much more like Dr. Yamane in terms of not having an antagonistic dynamic with Godzilla. He's more of a intrigued by him, fascinated by him, wants to learn about him, and functionally, the purpose that Joe Brody serves in the first third of the movie is sort of asking the questions and connecting the dots and driving things. And then once Joe Brody leaves the movie, it's very much sort of Serizawa who's kind of piecing together the mating calls and the callbacks that Godzilla's coming. It's sort of Serizawa taking over that sort of elder statesman role of trying to stitch all of this stuff together and make sense of it all.
Yeah, he's a very likable character for how he represents Serizawa. I think that's why he was the favorite that I went with.
Yeah, he's got this, Ken Watanabe was famously in The Last Samurai, but he's got this sort of Zen, elder, wise master about him. And, he's got, Sally Hawkins playing Dr. Graham, his assistant, who's this like apprentice kind of role with him. It's like the only thing that could have made that dynamic more fun is if she was also Japanese and they had like a nice dialogue scene in Japanese that was subtitled, just to kind of give that like vintage Godzilla feel. But Sally Hawkins was still good in her role.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I like that she comes back down the road in the sequel as well. So I mean, I like them as a duo for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, agreed.
On from Serizawa, I'll go ahead and give you my favorite soundtrack or score from the film, which I know we might be in the same ballpark on this one, but it was the main title from this film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, appropriately titled Godzilla because it's got an exclamation point at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that one. I'll throw a bit in here quick, but this one, this is by all means the best soundtrack to this film. So this is what that sounds like. I will tell you that I am jealous that you got to hear that in IMAX.
Yeah, it's certainly, look, nobody is an Akira Ifukube. Nobody can, when you're making when you're daring to give Godzilla a new theme, you can't win a battle against decades of lineage and established, that as the Godzilla theme. It'd be like someone trying to come up with a new James Bond theme and just trying to crack it with one go. So, Alexandre Desplat or Desplat, I don't know, if it's a Frenchy name with some silent letters, I apologize, but the composer of this film is a really good composer, is no Akira Ifukube, and nothing will make up for the fact that we don't have Akira Ifukube tracks in this movie. I feel like that's one big thing that really would have just kicked it up that extra 10%. If we could have had it filled with a lot of classic Godzilla themes, would have been great. But that main theme created for this film does have this great sense of sort of conspiracy about it, this great sense of sort of dread and intensity and like this thrilling sort of uncovering an ancient mystery kind of vibe to it, and government cover up and clandestine activities. Like, it captures that sort of vibe, and it pairs with the opening credits montage in a very, very strong way. And so it does the job of servicing this movie, even if, everyone deep down maybe would have preferred to get all of the iconic classic themes.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything you just said. But having the old part of the Godzilla march when have it kick in when his foot stomps at the airport, and as we slowly fade up to him and we get that roar would have been something epic. But I do like this main theme. I don't have a problem with most of the score or soundtrack in this film. My only gripe with it is that we don't have any of those Ifukube tracks or any of the old Godzilla throwback tracks in any part of this film.
Yeah, the score is a little kind of understated. It's like a little bit, it's one of those scores where it complements the movie pretty well, but when you listen to it, it's a lot of slow burn, a lot of eerie stuff, a lot of suspense. So that doesn't necessarily lend itself to like the most interesting or dynamic or memorable themes, because a lot of it's just very kind of low energy, building energy, mysterious energy. So it doesn't have a lot of just like great classic tracks that you just like can stay stuck in your head. But the main theme is solid, and it's a good sort of introductory piece. This film is sort of revealing Godzilla to the world, within the Monsterverse continuity. So it strikes the right kind of tone for this film. But yeah, I've seen a video on YouTube where they take the main Godzilla theme from King of the Monsters and they put it to these opening credits footage, and it gives it this whole different kind of energy that really, it's really, really cool. You can argue better or worse, but it's certainly very, very cool to see.
Yeah, and I've noticed that with a lot of things on YouTube, with the Godzilla, they like for Godzilla vs. Kong, they did it. They took like 70s Godzilla and Kong sounds and filtered them in, and then like the 90s Heisei Godzilla, or like Biollante with like the gritty roar with like
Mm,
the 2005 Kong roars, and put them in, filtered them in, just or like the different Mecha Godzilla roars and such. Like
mm-hmm.
there's always some fun stuff to find on YouTube like that.
Yeah, definitely fun.
Well, for this film, there was plenty of them that we could have chose from our favorite character. But what was your favorite line or favorite quote or most memorable line from this film?
Sure. Yeah, there's more than a couple. There's a couple of decent sort of like almost monologues in here. Uh, but if I gotta pick one, if I gotta go with one, it would be a line from Sarazawa where he says, "The arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control and not the other way around. Let them fight." Like that's the film in a nutshell, and I love it.
And that is originally what I had chosen for my favorite quote as well. And I was like, maybe Chris will take that one.
Oh yeah,
I did a second watch of this film, and I ended up choosing another one from Sarazawa, and it was, "Nature has an order, a power to restore balance. I believe he is that power."
yeah. Sarazawa gets some of the best lines in the whole film here. So I mean, can't go wrong with either of those. And some of the lines are just they're written as sort of these like wham lines. Like the kind of lines that that's going to be in the trailer, that's going to be on the posters. So great lines of dialogue.
Absolutely. I mean, I really wanted to go with the "let them fight," but I was like, I'm gonna leave it to Chris because I have a feeling
Oh
that's gonna
yeah,
be the one.
no way in hell I wasn't going to claim that one.
Well, you went quote. I'll give you my favorite scene, and I kind of was struggling between two, which was the Godzilla entrance from the airport, and then his fight scene with both the male and female Muto, where they're kind of bashing him and actually getting the better of him until the army destroys the female's nest and the eggs, and then Godzilla and the male kind of have a quick one-on-one where the male kind of circles around and the Godzilla just gives him a brutal tail whap into a building and kills him by impaling him on a part of the building, and then the building falls on Godzilla. Those two I had a tough one choosing from.
Yeah, those are excellent scenes. Like Godzilla's reveal is sort of it's iconic. You can't go wrong with that. I very nearly that was one of my sort of top two I was trying to decide between. And then it's hard to pick a favorite. So I'll just try to mention a pair that I love outside of Godzilla's reveal, and one of them is the first time that Godzilla uses his breath. The way that they've just blown up the Muto nest, and she's a grieving mother, and she sees Ford and is about to chomp him or crush him, and he's just like petrified, and then you see the blue light illuminate his face and his eyes jut to the side, and you see that Godzilla's tail is glowing and the spines are glowing, and he charges up and unleashes the breath. Like, again, not to keep calling back to the theater experience, but the movie does such a good job at like being so wrapped up in itself that throughout the movie, I wouldn't have had any doubt that they weren't going to do the breath in the movie, but throughout the movie, you're so not thinking about it, and you almost like forget about it, and it's not on your mind that when you see that the blue light and what's coming, it was such this, because different people in the audience were realizing it at different moments, so you just got this like oh like as everyone realized what was happening, and it was just an absolute tore the roof off the place. So it's like I don't think there's a more hype moment in the movie for me than that one. But I also want to give a shout out to the Halo jump, the high altitude jump, because it's set to Georgi Ligeti's Requiem, which is a track that was used in 2001 The Space Odyssey when they find the monolith. And it was used in the trailers, of course. And it's just like such a great sequence. To be a non-Godzilla sequence, it's just an excellent scene where they're, the soldiers are doing their prayer before they drop, and then they drop, and the cinematography with the red and the smoke and the sun, and you're dropping in, it's like this descent into hell, and you're seeing from Ford's perspective, you see Godzilla and the Muto fighting, but all you're hearing is his breathing. You don't hear the roars and sounds of the monsters. Like, it's just great kind of dive into the world of the monsters and their battleground. So that's an excellent scene as well, where Gareth Edwards was directing the hell out of it.
Yeah, I'll give credit to that scene. That is a gorgeous scene, and the film looks. I have the Blu-ray, and then I upgraded to the 4K, and in 4K that scene just is mwah. It's perfect.
Yeah, I too upgraded to the 4K, and this is one of those movies, I'm not, this is a time to mention that this is really one of the few movies where the bigger screen you can see it on, or the bigger TV, or the bigger setup, and the higher quality of the format you're using pays huge dividends towards the experience. If you're like streaming this on your phone, or streaming it on a laptop, or watching it on a small TV, or you just pop in the DVD, or you're streaming it and you're getting the pixelated stream, like, it really does a disservice to this movie. This movie really is one of those that is disproportionately more impactful the bigger you see it, or proportionately more impactful the bigger screen you're seeing it on. I happen to have a 120-inch projector in my living room that I shelled out for a little bit ago, and I did watch this on it last night, and it is a movie made for the big screen. Your appreciation of the shots and the scenery and the lighting and the cinematography just really goes up the bigger you can see it on, and the higher quality format you can see it on. And I just have to say that about this movie.
That is in my purchasing plans in the future, is a very large projector,
Nice.
4K
nice.
or whatever I can get. That's the best.
It's absolutely worth it. It's absolutely worth it.
Well, before we move on, I did want to give a shout out to two more scenes that I liked in the film, or really appreciated, and that was when the army ships were following behind Godzilla, and he has his fins just sticking out of the water, just kind of cruising along as he's swimming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Gods. Yeah, it's always a good moment to just see Godzilla's fins up out of the water. I understand there were maybe there was like a moment they cut of Serizawa like admiring the fins or looking at them and just kind of being in awe that he's that close to Godzilla. Would have been nice to have that moment in the movie, but yeah, it's Godzilla swimming is sort of like it becomes a staple of the movies, especially like the sort of CGI Godzilla swimming underwater kind of trope. Like Godzilla 2000 does it, and then a couple of the Millennium movies always seem to have their obligatory CGI Godzilla underwater scene. And so, this movie kind of honors that a little bit.
Yeah, I always love seeing that. And in this film, it's so subtle, and it's in broad daylight, and it looks fantastic.
Indeed.
And then the last one I wanted to give a shout out to was the Muto decapitation at the end with the atomic breath. That
that could have easily been anyone's favorite. The sort of kiss of death, as they call it. That's a show. I veer on the side of the argument that says that there is a little bit of a lack of Godzilla in this movie, not a dramatic amount, but that we just needed a little bit more Godzilla, or a little bit less of the movie around Godzilla to kind of balance it out a little better. But when he is on screen, it is always impactful. It always looks great. And the sort of finishing move on the Muto is great, because from what I understand, they were originally going to have it be a sort of King Kong type of moment where he sort of ripped the jaws open or ripped the jaw off, and they decided to make it something a bit more unique to Godzilla, and that people were going to love the atomic breath so much that they decided to switch it to him spitting the breath down the throat of the Queen Muto. And it's a great, it's straight out of a Mortal Kombat. It's a great fatality.
Yeah, and that's one of the scenes that I think just gets great dividends from having the 4K. The color of the atomic breath is way more blue. The when Godzilla comes from behind and like bites the queen like on her like shoulder back area, you can see much more of like the detail in Godzilla's face. And then like once the Muto's decapitated, you can see in much more detail the blood and like everything from her head being blown off from the inside. And it's the 4K, and I'm sure you having the projector does it even more wonders.
Yeah, it's definitely a very good visual moment for sure.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give those two scenes a quick shout out because I could even give a quick shout out to his exit, walking back out of the city and back, getting back into the ocean is a great scene. It has a great score to it.
Yeah, and the movie has this, great kind of bookending moment where one of the first visuals of the movie is seeing Godzilla's spines kind of breaking through the water in the old 50s stock footage, and then sort of the last shot of the movie is seeing Godzilla return back under the surface of the ocean. So like I like movies that can fit in some full circle, moments like that. That's always fun.
Yeah, this film has a lot of scenes to enjoy. Even though there's not a lot of Godzilla in this film, there's still a lot of good scenes that keep the movie rolling. And for Godzilla fans who are a little older like us can stay into and enjoy the film. Somebody who's 7, 8 years old that's just getting into Godzilla might not be able to stay, into this film or keep their attention span for the whole 2 hours.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I took when I saw it a second time, I took my 8-year-old brother to see it, and he was definitely getting a little restless, a little jittery in the theater because it wasn't quite fast paced enough for him as an 8-year-old. But certainly by the time you get to the sort of last third of the movie, the monsters are a bit more present. He was much more into it, and he loved Godzilla taking out the Muto at the end. He got into it, and we've rewatched all of these movies before we saw Godzilla versus Kong, and enjoys them a lot more as an adult who likes movies more and has more patience in general. But yeah, for the sort of 8 and under crowd, that sort of 10 and under crowd, like it's a little bit of a slow burn, a little bit of a not very entertaining experience because it does take itself quite seriously. So it's maybe not the best entry point for the younger fans, but we've got plenty of Godzilla movies for that. This one's kind of for the teens and above crowd.
Yeah, this is for you and I. Like I said, I'm 30. You're what, 31, 32. So I mean,
30,
this
31,
is for the little
31,
bit older crowd.
Yep.
This is for us to enjoy.
Exactly. And I do want to mention since we were talking about the final scene, sort of, I don't do this very often, but I know I'd like to throw out the little sort of headcanon stuff that I kind of infer or consider from these movies. And for this one, like I always kind of imagined, that bomb goes off kind of out in the ocean, when they send it onto the boat and autopilot it out as far as it can go. And like for me, the thing that I always thought of that sort of kept any fallout from hurting anybody is, and the reason that Godzilla's heading out into the ocean at the end specifically is like he's going to go absorb all of that energy. He's going to go absorb and soak up all of that radiation, and that both powers him up and possibly leads to his sort of growth into the next movie, as well as sort of preventing a sort of nuclear fallout catastrophe from happening.
I like that. Yeah, that's why he was able to grow 10 meters and his spines look a little different. I like that.
Yeah, and it's just stuff like that I thought they were gonna maybe bring it up in King of the Monsters, and they didn't. But I mean, that's fine. But it would be interesting if it maybe gets mentioned in the Monarch Legacy of Monster series. That would be a fun little thing. It's a tiny detail. It doesn't matter. It's kind of inferred or implied anyway. It's not the end of the world. But like, it would be cool if that like became like the official thing.
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to Godzilla 2014, what did you think of some monster designs? What did you think of the male and female Muto for an original monsters?
I think they're very cool. They sort of have this sort of the female has a sort of walking structure and style that kind of makes you think of Cloverfield, but the kind of texture and angles and shapes of the creatures, and according to the trivia, this is a true thing, that it's sort of took some cues from movies like Starship Troopers and things like that, the arachnids in Starship Troopers. And growing up, I was a massive Starship Troopers fan. So you see that there. I kind of like that they're a little insectoid, a little bug-like, a little exoskeleton. You know, I'm into that. I think they're really solid designs. They have this great kind of like the sort of like, I guess you would say, like exoskeleton kind of design. It sort of reminds you of the kind of way that like the aliens in the Alien movies are. They have this sort of you know, this sort of oh gosh, the word is escaping me. Not exoskeleton, but the sort of like hardened exterior shell like quality to their skin, or their their plating. It's almost like like a beetle has kind of like is plated in a way. It just has this great kind of vibe, and their angles and their lines are, it just creates interesting silhouettes, and it's just a good look. I think they are really, really unique monsters.
Yeah, I like them as well. I mean, you didn't, going into this film, you didn't know what you were gonna get, if it was truly, because from the trailers it looks like it's gonna be a Godzilla film where he's kind of like brought out as the villain, and once you see that there's something else in the trailer, it's like, oh, okay, so what is this, something that Toho brought back, or Hollywood brought from Toho and updated, or are we getting an original monster? But for an original monster, for the 2014 film, I like them. I like the design. I like how they went with kind of like the insectoid type thing, that the female is bigger than the male, and that like they're going like with the echolocation for like a mating call to meet up with each other. And I just like how everything in this film is like brought together into one down the road. Like it all comes to fruition in the film. There's nothing really left that we don't understand. We know why this is happening and why the Muto's doing this. But all in all, to get 100% back on track, I like the Muto's design. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite, but they are a good original monster. Something different.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I like the idea of, like, she's got like an egg sac, and like the nuclear missile is sort of like a fuel source towards kind of like feeding the eggs, and like like the idea of these sort of ancient monsters and titans kind of having this like nuclear mechanism to their biology is just really, really interesting. And another thing, the fact that we get a whole franchise of Monsterverse films after this one to enjoy and see more Godzilla and get more Godzilla. But this is the one time that the Mutos are front and center. So hindsight being 2020, it is very good that the Mutos get their proper attention and time to shine in this movie, because this is, for intents and purposes, this is their movie, because Godzilla is a through line through all of these movies. We get plenty of Godzilla spread across 3 going on 4 movies now. The Mutos kind of only get this movie to shine. So, perhaps it's best that we got them while we could in this movie.
Yeah, and they are given quite a bit of this movie, and I like what they do in it. And on the other side of them, in this corner, standing 355 feet tall.
Exactly.
What'd you think of the Big G himself in his return after about 9.5 years?
I think it's excellent. I think it's we can always make some arguments about I love that kind of lean look of Godzilla Final Wars, and I think that kind of look could look amazing in CGI. But I mean, I think this is I think Legendary has a great design for Monsterverse Godzilla. It's powerful. It carries a lot of weight. I'm a big fan of the tweaks made in King of the Monsters, but this is an excellent, excellent starting point that has almost, virtually everything right about it that you would want them to get right about it. And so, it's kind of got the scarring on the skin to kind of give it that rough texture that the original has from from the sort of nuclear bombing. I think that the keloid scars or whatever, however that's pronounced. And so it's got elements of that. He feels like an ancient regal creature, you know, like he's got this sort of like ancient dragon vibe to him, you know, and it's just a really, you know, it's a design that looks great from darn near almost any angle, and I don't know. It's an awesome Godzilla design. I love that his grand reveal is in a shot that starts at his feet and pans up to his head, because that's how he was reintroduced in 1984 in Return of Godzilla. They sort of do the pan up the body shot into the big close up, and they kind of emulate that here, and I think that's excellent. You know, so I think his roar is, you know, perhaps a little screechy, but like a little bit too just like all on the screech, but like it's a great modernization of the roar. You know, it sounds like Godzilla. It sounds like a modern iteration of Godzilla. You know, I'm a big fan of this design top to bottom.
Yeah, I second everything you say, but this our boy is thick in this film.
Indeed.
He he has evolved into a grown man here, and I like how they everything about him is like thicker, and then like it's jagged. Like his face is very pointed and jagged. His teeth just look really gnarly. His spines again are just super jagged, look like something you would see on like a really sharp like mountain range type thing. Like they're massive on his back. His tail is just thicker than all hell, and you believe that when he hits that male Muto with his tail, like, oh yeah, he's dead. Like you hear the crunch from that thing, and it almost reminds you of like a gator or a crocodile's tail, like how thick they are, and they're just solid muscle and straight power.
Absolutely power. It exudes power at it from every angle.
Yeah, this is a great Godzilla design, and you know, we talk about tier rankings and lists, but this is in the upper tier in my rankings. You know, this is probably a top 10 Godzilla design for me, and I love it through and through, and I think it only gets better through the Monsterverse.
Yeah, it's one of the best. It has some of some of the like favorite iconic qualities that you always want from a Godzilla design, sort of wrapped in a new modernization. You know, hard to imagine someone being sort of displeased with this look.
Yeah, I like he's, you know, they give him like actual facial expressions and stuff like that. You know, the male Muto is flying towards him, and he gives like a little snarl like
Yeah,
grin.
I was right about to mention that. And when they sort of first come into the rainy city, and you see the male Muto land, and then Godzilla sort of rises up, he's just got this like "come get some bitch" kind of a look to his face, and you just feel it. You know, you just feel it.
Yeah, and you know, I love the snarl. Like he knows that Muto's coming, and he's like, "Yep, come and get it, because I got something for you." Like he's
E-
already got the tail whip planned out and
exa-
everything.
Exactly. It's great, you know. And there's a moment in the battle with the two Mutos where he gets one of them on the ground, and it looks like he's pulling back to maybe do what might be the breath, but then the male comes in and hooks on him and stops him. But it's like it's just like one of those moments. It's like when you go back and watch again, it's like, oh, he was about to gear up to do the breath right then and there.
Yeah, you know, I would have loved to have seen the breath there, or even like, you know, his alpha roar, kind of like he did in Godzilla vs
Gosh,
Kong. You know,
yeah, well, dude, how do we not even mention the sort of the huge roar that he has in the third act, when he just kind of does the roar to end all roars? You know, you see him in the smoke, and like the lightning strikes to illuminate him, and then he bends down and he just does like his huge battle cry. Like that was a scene. There was one of the guys that I saw the movie with was like, that scene where he's roaring right at the camera for such an uninterrupted amount of time. He's like, it almost gave me anxiety. Like it's such a big moment, you know?
yeah, and that again, that in IMAX, I could only imagine, because I've spent a lot of money, you know, on the surround sound in the living room, but I can't compete with IMAX, so I wish I could have seen it again.
Yeah, it was a moment for sure. It was a moment, I can tell you.
Well, this is our first film of the Monsterverse, so clearly we can't do a ranking yet. And with there only being four Godzilla films soon to be in the Monsterverse, I don't think we want to get rid of any, so we could just do a ranking when it gets to it down the road.
Yeah, we'll just that's perfectly fine. You know, we're not nixing any of these or anything like that. There's not really much of a need to have that kind of conversation. You know, Monsterverse is kind of peak overall. You know, so it's going to be very interesting to talk about because all of the films I think do things as similar as some of them are. They're also all very very different, and they each do things really. Some of what one lacks, another one's really good at. What one might be great at, another one might not be not so great at, etc. So it's a really interesting compare and contrast, and it's tough to nail down a preference order, maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, if we tried to get rid of some, there's almost too much continuity between them if to get rid of one and keep the others.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't get rid of any of the MonsterVerse movies for anything.
Yeah, maybe down the road when we have 10 or 12 of them, if that comes to be, you know.
Yeah, maybe if they ruin the franchise a few years in, you know, how Hollywood likes to do, we'll be like, they should have stopped it after, you know, this movie, you know.
Well, on Godzilla 14, I think that's all I got besides some closing thoughts for you. I mean, if you're a Godzilla fan, this is a fantastic film, and if you are a Godzilla fan, you've probably seen it. As a younger Godzilla fan, you know, give it a chance. Be patient because it is a slow burner. But once it gets going, once you see Godzilla for that first time, it's a very quick glimpse, but it gets you excited for the rest of the film. So, I mean, this is a very high recommend for anyone who's a film fan or likes watching movies. You know, grab some popcorn, you know, crank it up and just enjoy it. But give it time because again, it is a slow burner. So just be patient and come to the end of the film. I mean, I'm not going to guarantee you're going to like it, but I'm going to give you about an 8 out of 10 shot that you're going to like this film or at least appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have an interest in Godzilla or creature features in general, but it's sort of a barrier for you of like, I don't want to watch a Japanese movie where the guys are in suits or they're, you know, 20 years old or anything like that. You know, if you're looking for something a bit more modern, looking for something a bit more American, you know, certainly don't go to the 1998 Godzilla movie as your first testing. This is excellent. This is an excellent place to start, you know, to get a flavor of it and to, you know, something that's a bit more American in style, a bit more thriller in style, a bit more of a slow reveal, you know, easing you into this whole concept of giant monsters in the modern world kind of a thing. You know, it's a good entryway for that to kind of get your mind in the right headspace. And you know, the Monsterverse is definitely, you know, a great go-to place for any sort of new prospective fan that is like, I'm trying to give these Godzilla movies a try. You know, the Monsterverse is definitely an excellent place to start if you're looking for something on the modern side of things.
All right, so that is all we have for Godzilla 2014, but we have a lot more Godzilla coming up as this 2014 film was followed up in the Monsterverse, but with Godzilla King of the Monsters released on May 31st, 2019. But we will be looking at Shin Godzilla, which came out in Japan on July 29th, 2016, and that is not a sequel to the Monsterverse. That is a standalone Toho film, but that is what we will be looking at next week, and I am excited for that one as well. I wish I would have seen the seen that in theaters as well, but sadly I did not. But as soon as it came out on Blu-ray and DVD and all that, I scooped it up.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get to see that one in theaters as well.
You're just stumping me on everything.
Yeah, me and one of the supervisors where I worked, we were both supervisors at the time. We both requested the day off and went and went and saw it subtitled and all. And you know, hard movie to get through subtitled because there's a lot of dialogue and they're talking fast in that movie. So all the times I've watched it owning it on Blu-ray have been dubbed. But a really, really good entry. Nice to see sort of Toho respond. Nice to see that the American reboot was so successful that Toho's like, we've got to do our own reboot now. We've got to give our own, restart for Godzilla in the modern era. And so definitely a lot to talk about, a lot to chew on, a lot to appreciate with Shin Godzilla.
Absolutely. And can't wait to get to that one next week. So, Chris, until next week, thank you again for joining me. 30 episodes in and a couple more to go, and we'll be off of Godzilla for who knows how long.
Yeah, we're approaching the final chunk here, the final third of the films, or less than a third of the films. It's incredible.
Yep, and we are getting there slowly but surely. Almost a year spent on the Godzilla franchise doing one episode a week, which is insane to think about.
That blows my mind. That doesn't even sound real.
But here we are. So again, thank you for joining me. It is always a good time.
Always.
Well, again, we have 2016 Shin Godzilla next week. So thanks again, Chris, for joining me. Thanks anyone who's listening. And until next time.